So when I was younger, I constantly pushed myself to exceed my own limits within my art. I tried increasingly elaborate ideas, more complex subject matters, and more epic compositions. Despite reaching for greater heights, my progress, particularly with painting, was painfully slow. And looking back, I do realize this is probably one of my bigger mistakes. Complexity, in essence, requires a deeper understanding of fundamentals. It's the subtle nuances that can transform even the simplest of images into something more captivating. Finding the balance between expression and technical precision is the key to mastering the art of subtlety with every creative decision. See this meadow or this grassy hill, for example? It's not too exciting, right? Kinda looks like my first grade school pictures that my mom would hang on her fridge. Well, thanks, Mom. If you compare these two images, they have the same elements, the same general shapes and lighting, but one is more visually appealing, right? There's a lot more interest involved. That comes from the subtlety in there, right? There's a lot more subtle variety of color. The brushwork itself is a lot more varied and implemented with a lot more finesse. And of course, there's a few little subtler details that also don't hurt it either. And images this simple is exactly what I recommend to many students to build up their fundamental skills. Because if you're trying to build up fundamental skills tackling imaginative fantasy and sci-fi characters and settings, without the proper foundational skills and without the referencing and technical ability, the growth is just a lot slower, right? We have to walk before we can run. So if you are an artist working on your fundamentals, maybe you're struggling to develop a style or balance a workflow, and you're looking to improve, then this will be the video for you. I'm Tyler Edlin. I've been an artist, illustrator, and instructor now for well over 10 years. And let's get into this. So let's pause for a moment because I mentioned something pretty important just a minute ago, and that is visually appealing, right? What is visual appeal? How can we define it? How can we measure it even? Well, that's really difficult and hard, as it's probably one of the most subjective things out there that we could describe. But think of it as something that's pleasing to look at. If we wanted to simplify this definition, we could say it is pleasing to look at because of its visual balance. Maybe it's because of the color harmonies. Maybe it's because of the emotions it could make us even feel. And if I had to put a firm label on it, I would say that we could achieve more aesthetically pleasing images through a combination of technical skill, creativity, and understanding the principles and elements of design. These are all things I'm going to be talking about in this video. So let's start off by saying that there is a distinction between technical skill and artistic expression, right? So some subjects, like a pyramid or a dog, they may be relatively easy to draw from a technical standpoint because they have clear shapes and very recognizable features. However, right, making these subjects visually appealing actually requires more than just technical accuracy. It involves considerations, such as composition, lighting, color, texture, overall artistic interpretation. And so while drawing a dog may be straightforward, capturing its personality, its movement, its emotional resonance in a way that engages the viewer is quite a bit more challenging. And here's a dog picture by Henry Wong, and I think he captured this perfectly. Right? This dog, it's it's not an invasion, it's not a fantasy battle, it's not a dynamic cityscape. It's just a dog's head poking out of some flowers. But I find this very visually intriguing due to all of the technical qualities of it, from the patterns, the rhythms, to the color combinations, to the use of textures and shape design, and the lighting. I find all these things add up to make this picture very visually striking. And of course, then there are objects that are very hard to draw and easy to make visually appealing, right? Some subjects have a complexity due to their either their intricate details, their challenging proportions, or their dynamic forms. But, once of course these technical hurdles are overcome, they can inherently be visually appealing with a lower amount of effort. For example, drawing a landscape with very detailed, lush foliage, or an intricate architecture like a Gothic spire tower, or a dynamic figure in motion would require advanced drawing skills. Still, though, once you can pull that off, these subjects inherently possess visual interest and appeal due to their complexity and subject matter. And it is easier to kind of strike a chord that is beautiful, or simply add some sort of emotional impact to them. Maybe that's with a choice of lighting. So let's just review a few quick reasons as to why I recommend this sort of learning approach. And the first one is that it's far less time commitment, right? Like if I'm taking a very simple subject matter and trying to present it in a fairly simple and straightforward way, it could be done anywhere from 30 minutes to potentially 2 hours if I really want to stretch it out and put some details in it. Compared to like if I'm painting a battle scene or designing a fantasy cityscape, that would require like days of planning and preparation, right? I got to come up with a design language, have to do the research, have to do lots of preliminary sketches and planning. Every step requires more complexity. Therefore, it's going to take a long time to execute. And, if I'm an inexperienced artist trying to execute on that, it's going to be weeks, maybe days before I'm getting any kind of input on whether or not that's working or not. Whereas you sit down, you do a simple study, and you try to do it really well, you'll know, like I said, pretty much immediately whether that's working or not. And my second favorite reason why I love this is because of the workflow wise. It's very approachable, right? You're either drawing or you're going to be painting. You can use very few layers, even fewer kind of digital brushes. Technique-wise, it's as straightforward as it comes, right? Like I'm not having to juggle 3 to 4 different software packages. I'm not needing to get additional references and do that research. It's just one reference, go, 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 right? Always kind of forward-moving momentum. And because of that, that leads me to number 3, which is that if something is going wrong at these earlier stages, it's very easy to identify and isolate the variables of whether it's working or not. So is it going to be the composition that looks off? Or is my lighting not structured well enough? Or is my texture too muddy, right? Very easy to isolate what is not working when there's relatively few pieces to juggle. And the last point on why I really like this method of learning is that it's great for any skill level. I've been doing this, for over 15 years. I can still get something out of this. Someone that's never painted before can try a simple study and perform with that and get an immeasurable amount of growth from that experience. But with all that said, let's go over the different ways that I feel that you can implement subtlety now. And I'm going to break this down into 3 main categories. The first one is simply going to just be by feeling. The second category will be all the different elements of art and design. And the third one will be all the principles of art and design. All right, so number 1 today is feeling, right? Infusing feeling into your work. No matter whether you're a painter, an artist, or a production designer, there are numerous ways to infuse emotion into your work. While colors and composition are the most direct ways to infuse emotion in, there are more subtle and intricate ways, such as details and your brushwork itself. Look at this example here that I whipped up the other week, right? Color palettes. Colors are very powerful to infuse emotion. Warm tones like reds and oranges, they can convey passion and intensity, and while cool tones like blues and greens can evoke calmness and melancholy. So here's the same meadow, same composition, same layout, and they feel very different because of the colors, because of the lighting. And I talked about this a lot in the previous video. If you missed that, definitely go check that out. But yes, even a very fundamentally simple picture just like this has a lot of breathing room in terms of the ways you can implement subtlety. Let's get more specifically into the brushwork within an image next. So here's same subject matter, pretty similar composition. Sorry, I don't know the names of the artists on this, it was not credited, but the fundamental way that these pictures are constructed are in fact very different. Soft blended brushstrokes can create a sense of tranquility, while bold, more expressive strokes, like the one on the left, can convey more energy and tension, right? There's just a slightly different style, but a different feeling because of the way the brushstrokes are implemented. So again, here's a study I did this week through composition and lighting, right? And we're specifically talking about the arrangements of elements and the direction of the light, the color of the light, and the intensity of the light, right? This is a very kind of soft picture. We've got like a little guy, he's hiding about here, and there's a looming boat on the horizon. Is this a chase scene? Is this some sort of sabotage story? Is it a prisoner story or a war one, right? There could be numerous implications just by the way the elements are arranged in the picture. So for example, I painted a completely different version of this where we switched up the lighting a little bit, a little more optimism in there, a little bit of a direction change, right? Paints a very different story. So a lot of the time students are slipping up the messaging in their work because they're not thinking clear enough in terms of like what these potential pieces can mean by the ways they fit together. So use light and shadow to enhance the mood, right? Soft diffuse lighting can create dreamy or nostalgic like atmosphere, while dramatic lighting can invoke a sense of mystery or drama. So second up today, let's talk about the elements of art and design. Think of these as the visual building blocks that make up our pictures. Aspects like lines, shapes, textures, to even colors, right? These make up our pictures. They can set the mood, communicate a meaning, and engage with the viewer's perception of what's going on in the image when implemented correctly. Look at Henry Wong examples here, my good buddy. He's got a very simple, what would seemingly be like a very boring, mundane scene of a coast, but because of his subtle use of texture, and that's what I'm emphasizing here in this one is the texture. We're implying sand through a combination of shapes, lines, the foliage is a nice stippled pattern, right? Everything is constantly shifting gears, and the pattern, the way the light is organized in those lines across the scene, it's very abstract, but it makes me feel really great looking at it. So not every detail is explicitly painted out here, and that's the beauty of it. There's a lot of it that is implied, and texture is the name of the game here. In his second example, which is a very simple grass scene, right? A lot of people struggle to make grass look interesting, and that's the whole subject here is the grass, and it's really using the very subtle, intricate shape design in this. So I want to focus on shapes in particular, but there, of course, is a very powerful use of lines and color as well. But right, shapes are very two-dimensional areas defined by boundaries made by combining lines. Conventionally, they are squares, triangles, and circles, but there's a lot of subtle circles here. This is really interesting because it's all very organic, and very little of it is geometric, of course, because it is grass, but it's just so varied and subtle, it's making it very visually interesting for me. To kind of go with that, right, we have Maciej Sidorowicz here, who's also using texture like Henry and shapes, a lot of shape design, but there's a lot of use of line in this piece as well. Lines are marks or strokes that define those shapes, right? And they can really help create movement and a direction in a particular piece. They can be straight, they can be curved, they can be short, they can be long. Lines have a lot of characteristics, so when we put thought and care into those individual lines that make up the eventual shapes, that's a lot of subtlety that can be made to the work. Everything here is just contributing to the overall composition and the feel of it. Nothing is perfect, right? Everything has a little bit of wonk, everything has a little bit of texture and grit to it, and it's just bringing a lot out of the moment. And the third major way today has us paying close attention to the principles of art and design, which are different than the elements, which I just went over. Principles are basically just guidelines to how you can organize the various elements within your scene. And among them, for myself, emphasis, contrast, and rhythm stand out as a really great way to create visually captivating work with even very simple, mundane subjects. So in this example, right, by Shadi Safadi, right, we're talking visual hierarchy within an image. He takes just a whole landscape, you can kind of see that up on screen here. He's just focusing on a little bit, and this is what he's going to emphasize in the picture. And of course, he's building it up with just very few simple shapes, and then eventually into more subtle use of texture and of course balancing it on light. But we know this scene is about these couple shrubs, right? And he's making everything work to show that these bushes or small trees are the most important thing in the image. And that's a great way of making it visually interesting. That's the dominating thing. Everything else is subdominant to it. But think of it as giving your image a purpose. And there's a number of different ways that you can create emphasis or visual hierarchy in an image. Color, value, size, right? There are all kinds of forms of contrast, which I'll cover in a moment. Subtle changes in these elements can help create depth, establish focal points, and guide the viewer's eye through the composition, ultimately enhancing the overall visual hierarchy of a picture. And so my second one under the principles is contrast. And there's various degrees of contrast in terms of what is strong and what is weaker forms of it, with value being the most powerful and texture being the least or most subtle. Variety is the spice of life, and our eyes are just naturally inclined toward it. Variances in brightness, color, size, the shape, the direction of objects and shapes, edge control, these all play subtle roles in how we perceive an image. The better we know how to utilize contrast within an image, the more powerful of scenes that we can create. And the most simple thing you can do is take a little chart like this, feel free to screenshot it, and when you think you're done your image, or maybe when you're in the planning stages, just try to figure out where and how you're going to do it. Is this going to be light or is this going to be dark? Is this going to be smooth? Is this going to be rough? Is this going to be lost or is this going to be found, in regards to the edges? And you can go through almost like a checklist to see if your image has some of those qualities. All right, so the last principle I want to touch upon today that I think is really important to implement subtlety in your work is rhythm. Think of it as the repetition or alternation of various elements throughout a scene. And with an image like this, it's always about the movement and flow, and it gets it from the rhythm. Without it, things are just going to be overly stiff and static, and I've implemented it in this very kind of simple enough scene in a few different ways. So as you can see here, I've alternated and arranged the various components in this scene to create a sort of rhythm and flow to it. So I'm having a variety of spacing, the size, and of course the way these elements are overlapping throughout the scene, and it all adds to the movement of the piece. With rhythm, you can be a little bit more obvious like I was today, or you could be a little more subtle. The trick is to kind of try different things and see what works best for you. But anyways, that kind of wraps up my brief little discussion on ways you can implement subtlety to create visually appealing images within simple subjects. Because when you put thought, care, and technique all together, you can make even the most simple image pretty elaborate and beautiful at the end of the day. And while progressively adding complexity to your studies is crucial for skill development, starting with simple, easy, and direct approaches is what I often advise. And I guarantee there is a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from taking something so simple and doing something extraordinary with it. But I'd like to just thank you guys for watching. I have links below for everything, including the new mailer, which you can get a bunch of freebies for signing up on. And let me know what topics you guys want to hear about next. I'll catch you guys next time.